This
Okay.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay, everybody, this is Tamara Ledley, a longtime member of the Clean Network. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's teleconference. We do have a presentation today, but before we get to that, I'd like to ask if there are any announcements.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Jim Callahan, climatechangeeducation.org. A little thing of an NGSS project, mostly with the students here in Oakland, California. It'll also kind of reach out if there are other folks at NOAA who would be interested in this. What we're finding with the students is a couple of things. One is Dorian, which was a horrendous hurricane, especially to the Bahamas, does have an interesting thing from a science education and action perspective. It just hovered for like 2 days. So taking the animations of the GOES satellite, the students are able to really pull out a lot of data that is more climate oriented, although most people look at those satellites from a more weather. Of course, they interrelate, but the weather perspective, it's some pretty interesting ways so the students themselves can actually help pull the science forward and then link it to action on climate change. And that's just something we want to kind of check. They're going to put out a lot of what they did at the Bay Area Science Festival, but there's fascinating things that where students can actually make a contribution to. It's a little bit like the SETI at home kind of thing, where people can themselves actually there's so much data that people can dig things out that even maybe the specific scientists aren't able to find. So anyway, just wanted to mention that, and I'll probably put a notice on the Clean Network. But that's a thing if there's anyone who wants to collaborate with. Students are doing some pretty exciting things. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements? Anybody involved in getting ready for Climate Week or the climate strike?
Absolutely, here in California.
I haven't been, but I guess I would more, so I don't have an announcement. This is Katie. I have a question though for those who maybe are less involved. Like I'm not directly involved with these climate strikes, but want to show my solidarity. What are others doing? Are you actually, considering I work in climate education, like, is it helpful for me to strike, or should I keep working? Or, what do other people think? Or what are other people doing on Friday?
This is Tamara. I've been a bit conflicted because I have I teach my class, and my class is on Friday mornings, and so I have things that I want the students to engage with. So at Bentley University, where I'm teaching, they have set up a program for Climate Week, and I have advertised and suggested the students participate in that. But with the climate strike, I have a little bit more conflict because I want the students to come to my class. But what I have found is you can, in this context, I went online to look up climate strike, and there's a map that shows the climate strike activities going on around, in my case, the Boston area. And some of them are not during, they're not all day events. They're events that some are during the day, some morning, some afternoon, but some in the evening also. So you could potentially find something that's a little bit more akin or fits more with your schedule. I just wanted to say that I do have this tension about it, but I'm still promoting the students to participate in Climate Week because there's a whole week-long set of activities that they can engage in.
Yeah, this is Wendy Abshar. So we shared the resources that went around the Clean Network, that especially the teaching resources and places for teachers to look. We shared that with our network as soon as it came out and said, hey, teachers, are you looking for resources related to these events? And left it, very wide open for them to choose to decide what made sense for them. For my own staff, no one has brought it up to me that they are personally going to strike. I would support it if they did. And awkwardly or easily for me, I happen to be on leave on Friday because I'm traveling to a wedding, so I didn't have to face the personal conundrum myself.
Thanks. It's nice to hear others' perspectives on it. So thank you both.
And Jim Callahan here. Absolutely, I think we all share the the kind of awkwardness of a strike when we're educators, and I think we've had kind of time to adjust to it. We're not hitting the schools. We don't want people to hit the schools. They're not the problem, but there's a day of action. One of the things is by having posted an event that was on September 8th, the giant event that was near Berkeley. We were getting all these messages from people because I was organizing an event essentially. There was a lot of classes, K through 12 classes, there are university students who were asking clarification of what day our event was and things. But basically they were saying, we want to take our class to the event. It's just going to be, that's what our class is doing. So quite a lot of educators, a lot of schools, that's what they're doing. It's a day where we're just going to basically take a field trip. And so the people, that's been a lot of the ways to do it. We ourselves did education on the 8th. I've learned not to try to do a lot of hands-on science at climate action events. I mean, we've been doing these for 20 years. There's climate action events in California that go on things. People don't tend to do a lot of education on those days. We'll particularly pay attention. We'll be part of the Sproul Plaza event. There's one at Laney College, and there's two in San Francisco. We'll kind of spread out to those different ones. But I think that's a lot of it is, and say, I mean, UC Berkeley, it's no big deal. There's rallies on campus from 11 to 12 all the time. It's like, that just happens all the time. It doesn't mean classes don't happen. You just, after you're done, you walk down 100 yards to the rally, and then you go back to class and things. So anyway, it's an issue, but I think people are finding a way around it, that it's not pitting education against the action event.
Thank you. This is Tamara again. I have a brief announcement. The survey that I've spoken about a number of times, this survey is for classroom teachers exploring how they fund their professional development, so we can think more concretely about how to develop a financial model or business model to provide professional development for teachers around the topics of climate change is open, and it's going to be open for a while. I know some of you are sending out newsletters, some of you had sent blast outs to your email networks. Responses are coming in slowly, so if you do have an email list and you're willing to remind your people on your email list to respond to the survey, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't sent it out, please do. It is, if you want the information, I'll send another email to the Clean Network at large with the draft text to you, so that you don't have to really work too hard to send it out. It's also posted on the Clean Network Facebook page, plus other Facebook pages. I think NESTA also has it posted there. So just wanted to let people know that we really would like to get to responses to that survey. Any other announcements? Okay, if not, we will move on to our presentation today. We have Claire Anderson. She is the executive director and co-founder of the Ripple Effect. And there she ensures that the Ripple Effect is constantly building towards their mission of educating and empowering the next generation of water literate leaders. Most recently, she's taught elementary math and science at KIPP Central City Primary School and for 7 years, and was a curriculum fellow for KIPP New Orleans. She's going to be talking to us today about working across scales, coordinated, comprehensive K-12 water literacy education for a changing climate. So with that, Claire, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for inviting me to present, and also for allowing me to take this time to talk about Ripple Effect. So we are based in New Orleans. Real quick, the agenda. I wanted to give a little bit of context for where Ripple Effect came from, what it has to do with this landscape, what it has to do with New Orleans and Southeastern Louisiana. I wanted to show you an example of the kind of science unit that we undertake and work with teachers to create and teach. And then I wanted to end with some longer term goals and questions that our organization is grappling with right now. Nothing easily answered, of course, but things that we view as particularly tricky, and that we really would like to engage partners beyond Louisiana in answering. So our mission, we educate and empower the next generation of water literate leaders. And we are envisioning this future where basically students and their families have the creativity, the knowledge, the ethics as well to deal with the challenges inherent in a changing climate and the environments that they live in. The way that we do this, this is kind of a fun model that shows all the different stakeholders involved. We began as an alliance between scientists, classroom teachers, community members, and a fair number of urban designers and graphic designers, media designers, storytellers, essentially. This alliance, 6 years ago, we came together and decided to start crafting curriculum and learning experiences that we could test out in our own classrooms and then distribute to a larger community of teachers here in New Orleans. That work has since traveled a little bit beyond New Orleans. And when we say curriculum, we basically, we're using that word fairly broadly. The pendulum for us has swung from working with teachers to help them design and teach units that they create based on sort of the early stage professional development and science content acquisition through workshops, different kinds of teacher training and field trips, etc. We started actually 6 years ago with that model where teachers were really developing curriculum and driving all of the learning outcomes and developing every piece of it and ultimately teaching it, letting us track it. They participated in a year-long fellowship. And then we swung the pendulum back the other way and kind of tried, as we were trying to figure out our model, where we worked with a smaller group of teachers and designers and scientists to develop full curriculum, every lesson, every day, multi-grade units based around next generation science standards with a shared anchoring phenomenon. And then after an initial pilot, we would distribute and train teachers in those units. And since that time, we've actually moved a little bit more into the middle where as teachers, a lot of us really believe that curriculum is something that, there's no shortage of curriculum in the world, and the true magic happens when a teacher is able to take a great resource and make it their own and make it match their students. So that is really where we're at right now, almost thinking of curriculum in terms of what are the essential building blocks we need to provide, how does that interact with teacher training, and ultimately how does that really challenge students and raise the bar in terms of what we expect to happen and to be discussed in science and social studies classes. So here are our main guiding principles. I just wanted to get these out there before I tell you a little bit more background on ripple effect. Making learning visible for teachers by teachers, science needs stories. Obviously, a lot of the complex issues that we're trying to tackle about climate change and about water, they're inherently dynamic, they're inherently multidisciplinary, and if we stay 30,000 feet above Earth and never drill down into the classroom moments that really are the basis of deep learning, if we never really understand those moments, then we're going to continue staying at 30,000 feet and not actually impact real classrooms. So our interactions with teachers and our co-creation with teachers is absolutely central to our work. So just to back up a little bit, we are a K-12 education nonprofit. We provide interdisciplinary environmental science instruction, and all of our work is constantly centered on real communities who are impacted by climate change and water-related issues of climate change specifically. We develop, we test, we teach curriculum, and we really do that focusing on Title I schools. And our explicit aim is to improve student achievement and increase climate resilience in the communities most vulnerable to climate change impacts. So here's really where we started. Here's that 30,000-foot view. Here in New Orleans, we have an incredibly segregated school system, unequal access to high quality education. We have a great many heroic and wonderful teachers and school leaders and district leaders who have for years been hammering away at the issue of our school system and are continuing to do amazing work. Of course, it's always a question of how do you systematize the successes. And how do we make sure that we're retaining teachers in the process? So about 70% of our schools are charters. It's an incredibly disaggregated school system right now, where I think people are really hoping that success will rise to the top, and then we can start replicating some models that work to varying degrees of success. I'd say anybody who works here doesn't believe that we've cracked the code by any means, and we're far away from it. Meanwhile, we obviously have these really urgent environmental issues. We live in a place where coastal land loss and subsidence and other water-related impacts of climate change are drastically and rapidly changing the landscapes that our kids live in and their families live in. And Louisiana adopted next generation science standards just a few years ago, I think 2-3 years ago now. And they represent a hugely rigorous shift, very challenging, and also come with a great number of opportunities. And we're actually very excited about the new standards and what they mean for our kids and for our teachers. To drill in on the micro, this was the school where I taught for 7 years. I taught at Kip Central City Primary. This was our school courtyard. Imagine a square with a square drilled out of the inside. All 4 walls of the building faced inward on this courtyard. It was our play space for 530 kids, K through 5. And as you can see, the main play area flooded every time it rained, and standing water stayed there for 3 days, ruining recess. At the time, this was my first year of teaching, the Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan was in the works. And I happened to be roommates with a person who was working on that water plan at an architecture firm just down the road from the school, Wagner and Ball Architecture and Environment. And as they were developing this plan, they were starting to really dive into this issue, controversial at the time, of changing the paradigm with how we relate to our landscape in a place such as New Orleans and the coastline, and think in terms of living with water. This is a radical departure from the way most people were raised in New Orleans, the way most people think of water. We have these massive canals just drawing water out of the bowl of New Orleans at all times. And a lot of this water is out of sight, out of mind. Massive flood walls, canal walls, everything is designed and built. The infrastructure is designed to almost hide water, I would say, or to get it out of the city as quickly as possible. And it's had some very adverse effects on the city at large, with the city sinking faster than it would naturally, and the bowl and parts of the bowl getting deeper and deeper, to the point that several parts of the city are currently below sea level. Anyways, we developed a unit, me and some of the urban designers and architects who were working on this plan at the time. And we decided to use this courtyard as a microcosm for the issues facing the city. Like, we're capturing this water, it can't go anywhere. Where does it go? And how do we live with it and make use of it in a way that makes sense? How do we achieve a greater level of harmony with this environment that we call home? This led to a 4th grade water workshop. Here's some of my students for my first year, and here are the designers in the bottom right presenting some of their work on the Greater New Orleans Water Plan. And they came to my class for a couple of days in a row. And the kids basically learned how to use a design vocabulary. I think you can see in the top right photo some of the little symbols on a white paper, where they were tracing these symbols for different design interventions, such as different size gravel and channels and ponds and rocks and things, rain gardens as well. They're using these tools to develop a plan for where to hold this water that was falling on their courtyard. And while they were doing that, they were kind of learning what this had to do with the city at large. So the designers sitting in front of this model on the floor, that's actually a topographic model, so kids could really feel the bowl. And they also were able to see a lot of the early visuals of the Greater New Orleans Water Plan that shows the extruded flood walls and sort of the, I guess this picture on the bottom left, it really hit the kids how much what we think of as land is actually this flowing landscape of water and mud and silt that is constantly changing. And the infrastructure that we've put in place over time is essentially trying to stop those processes, but will never actually achieve stasis, not by any means. And in fact, sometimes can make the situation worse. Over time, we built this idea out further. This image actually comes from LA SAFE, which is a massive statewide water planning project happening right now. And I apologize that I don't have the reference on this page, but I'm gonna fix that. The hybrid landscape is important because while we could think of this as a purely environmental issue, there's obviously a lot of people here and a lot of industry. It's at the base of the Mississippi River. There's like this incredible historical story about our nation's founding, commerce, economy, race, class, identity, early settler exploration. And those issues are absolutely integral to the kinds of learning experiences that we want students to undertake. And we've found that even if we've ever tried to just focus on the science, the social issues and the community histories sneak their way in, and this is what really is grabbing kids and making these issues matter. Of course, we're dealing also with pretty scary coastal stuff right now. This is an article from the New York Times that ran recently. It's just one of many, many articles that, not the New York Times, I'm sorry, the New Yorker, one of many, many articles floating around, and it seems something is published about Louisiana's coastal land loss issues. Something is written at least once a month, it feels like, but I felt like this map was incredibly helpful for showing exactly what we're looking at and exactly how even our concept of land and water has to be different here. It has to be more flexible than that, and we have to really be thinking about what is livable land, what are wetlands, what is becoming wetlands, and why is it becoming that? And of course, as we've dove in even more deeply, we understand that these issues are not unique to New Orleans. They in fact connect to lots of other places, not just coastal, but many of them coastal. We're also looking at situations where climate adaptation is having a real human cost. What some people have phrased the nation's first climate refugees, Ile de Jean Charles, is happening right now, right here. And as these, in the last 50 years, I believe they've lost 90% of the landmass that the Native American tribe is living on. They're currently being resettled further inland. And as we understand it, the word first is important. And we're thinking in ripple effect, well, like, what does this mean for kids? And who is this really affecting? And who has the resources to deal with this kind of uncertainty, and who does not? Who is prepared and who is not? And we realize more and more that this is drawing us to a central question of what are schools for? What is education for? What are we really preparing our kids to tackle in the future? So this quote kind of sums it up for me. After that first unit on New Orleans specific water problems, I remember we gave the kids an article, that very clearly described the conundrum of a sinking city and a rising sea happening simultaneously. And Kalia, fourth grader, her family's been in New Orleans for generations, asked this question. And to me, that was when ripple effect really started. It was just a one class experiment up until that point. But after she asked this, it was like, well, why don't we do this? This feels like the right thing to pursue. And even though Kalia was a fourth grader, she and her peers really did want to think about and know how these environmental issues could impact their neighborhoods, could impact their futures. And we return to this quote quite a bit whenever we need a reminder of our mission and who we're ultimately here to serve. So thinking through sort of sorry, can everyone hear me still?
Yes, I can
Yes.
hear you.
Oh, okay, great. I just got a little notice that my network connection might be off, but sounds good. This was a slide that I presented at a couple of conferences in the last year. One was at the Collider in Asheville, another at Iowa State National Science Foundation hosted a conference on the buzzword of late, convergence, where multiple or two disciplines come together around a wicked problem and are creating new research and new knowledge and new actions simply by breaking down these disciplinary walls. And in these rooms of scientists and policymakers and business people, I often find myself to be, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of you as well, I find myself to be one of the only or the few teachers in the room. And I find it's helpful to help those audiences understand, like, if you really care about these issues and you're really seeking generational systematic change, think about schools. Think about schools as community centers, think about curriculum, think about the standards that are like sweeping the country and are in places that are being adopted by these different states. And I try to tell them how a change in standards is such a sea change in how science is taught. It really is an opening. I mean, it's chaotic and it's hard and it's not without its challenges for sure. But it's also an opening because it's calling into question, it's saying, here's this new bar of rigor for science instruction, but it's not telling us what to teach. It's not telling us exactly the content that we need to provide kids to get them to master those standards. And I find that teachers are looking for resources constantly. And our goal with Ripple Effect lately has been to deepen our interactions with scientists working on these issues and with policymakers so that the curriculum we're testing with kids is as up-to-date, current, locally relevant as possible. This is sort of a quote that's kind of representing the second half of Ripple Effect, which is, we don't just create the curriculum, we dive into the instructional piece with teachers. I was in a classroom just this morning, actually, was for a few years of teaching at KIPP, was a science instructional coach, which may make anyone laugh who is a more experienced teacher than I am, and I would understand that. In New Orleans, by the time you get to year 3, you're considered a fairly experienced public school teacher. And by year 7, I found myself in the position of coaching other teachers and helping develop curriculum for our region and also for KIPP national, largely focused on 4th grade math and science. This is the way that the standards are asking teachers to teach science is also different. It's not just the content. And that hurdle is something that we have to deeply understand ourselves, and then we also have to provide teachers with that support. Otherwise, we'll continue producing curriculum that is not used or is not used well, and we won't see the results we need to see with students. I'm just going to skate over. This is Louisiana's adopted version of Next Generation Science Standards. Plan and conduct investigations, the emphasis on student-driven inquiry, so critical, planning these investigations and also reaching the disciplinary core idea while connecting it to other realms of science. It's all in one unit. And here's an example of the kind of standard that we would really drill down on. We're currently working, we call ourselves K-12. Most of our experience has been elementary. We've started working with middle school for sure. And we've done a little bit with high school, but we haven't dove as deeply into the high school standards with those teachers. Instead, we've done other kinds of programs with them. Ultimately, this is really what we're after. This is a wonderful continuum developed by the EPA that we refer to a lot in our work. When we say water literate leader, this is what we mean. We're moving down this never-ending path towards stewardship, which is not an end goal, it's a lifelong pursuit. And it's not simply becoming a climate change warrior. It's about helping or ensuring that these students they're not spitting out news stories. They're actually actively taking part and practicing stewardship by developing knowledge in the classroom, by assembling knowledge from other spheres and synthesizing it, by moving from decision making to action, and really starting to see themselves and see science as a pathway to change. This was one of our early units. I had to represent a little bit of New Orleans. We used Mardi Gras beads to represent water, and then they used topographic models to see where the water collected. These are some of our workshops with teachers, a blend of field trips. We visited a pump station so they could, I think most people in New Orleans have never seen the inside of one of these, but they're critical to our survival. Top left, Allie Malcolm, awesome teacher, has just created a visual unit plan. We do all of our unit planning big and on the walls with these like repeatable shapes so that people like the audience that she's speaking to, that's a school principal, an environmental scientist and educator, and an architect and planner. And this way we can effectively engage audiences who don't speak the jargon of K-12 education, don't speak the jargon of science standards, but do have critical knowledge that we need to pass on to kids. Here was a different workshop on soils and water. This was part of a unit on Ile-de-Jean-Charles and the resettlement of that community. But we needed teachers to get their hands dirty. We needed them to practice messing with these supplies like water, drawing, diagramming is a big piece of this, mapping. As soon as we make something place-based, we're finding that we're asking teachers and we're asking students to interface with different kinds of learning tools that they may not be accustomed to. It's not all reading and writing. Some of it is highly visual, some of it is highly hands-on, and we use workshops as this opportunity to make sure teachers are getting their feet wet and feeling comfortable, really thinking about how they're going to roll this out in their classroom for the first time for many of them. And students are designing solutions. This was, if you might recall, one of the earliest slides showing the watery courtyard. There was also a watery bus lane with a flooded sidewalk. And so these are some students who they didn't say the courtyard so much as they looked at how water was pooling along the pathways surrounding the school and used that to understand how the drainage system is really working, where water goes when it hits the roof, flows down the gutter, hits the storm system. This was critical because in our first, I should have mentioned this, in our first water workshop, that 4th grade one, a lot of kids had major misconceptions about water and where it goes. They said, well, if the courtyard's flooding, why don't we just put a roof over the school? And that's when we realized, wow, there's this entire system of knowledge that they need to be acquiring about if you solve one problem, it hits your neighbor. If you solve just your neighbor's problem, it hits the neighborhood next to yours. So you really have to think about the entire city or start to ask questions and realize that solutions are really complicated. It's not just fixing it in your own backyard. The water always continues to flow. Here's a quick dive into our unit. This was when we developed a unit nose to tail, basically, every piece focused in on this community. Students used wave models to study how coastal erosion was actually happening. They, on their own, through experimentation, basically came up with the multiple lines of defense strategy that is like a bedrock of protecting the coast against further land loss, where you don't just need one solution, you need several. And they used, thanks to our designers, we were able to use marker on the outside of the plastic bins to help students understand sectional drawing, and then also looking down from above like a bird to understand the plan view. And Lethadius on the right is very actively leading his class in a discussion of how the landform is changing, and he's able to convey that through drawing. And one more thing before I move on. I wish I had showed, we gave the students a lot of photographs, quotes, and short documentary film about Ile-de-Jean-Charles and the locals there. And students had to understand what was important to them as a people before diving too far into the science. I will say, like, in the interest of being completely vulnerable about our shortcomings, this unit was deeply flawed in that coastal land loss and the relocation of this tribe is not something that can be solved. Not only are they already moving, there are multiple other sites along the coast that are being lost and will be lost in the coming decades. And we realize, like, it's a big question for us. Like, what are we asking students to grapple with? What is fair for them developmentally? What is appropriate for them developmentally? And how do we, as educators, deal with the very real themes of loss and risk with students without creating an atmosphere of hopelessness? So we learned a lot from this unit, and I think we definitely want to continue focusing on real communities. We're going to be working with the Lower Ninth Ward in the coming months to to try this again, as well as journalists and oral historians and some documentary filmmakers try to capture the evolution of Lower Ninth Ward in a similar way. And I think we're going to keep an eye out for these tricky issues of how we present these issues to kids and how we bring in the ethical and moral implications of these kinds of changes. So these are our very ambitious goals. When we say water literacy education, we're really talking about water security. It's related to climate change, of course. I heard a beautiful quote at a conference recently that said, if climate change is the shark, then water is the teeth. And we're looking at, right now, we're looking at an overabundance of water because we're really zooming in on the lessons we can learn from this region. But we would really like to connect to existing research in water literacy and other places that are doing this to start to network this thinking and our research in classrooms and say, like, well, there are some things that we know we must do, and there are some things we know we must replicate to prepare students. So I will end here. These are our big questions. And they're tricky because, well, I think they're just inherently tricky. We're dealing with scientific knowledge and scientific processes of investigation, and we're also dealing with the lived experiences of people and how, while those two ideas often mutually support one another, there are times where they don't. And we want students to understand those gaps and also be faced with moments where they must evaluate the claims and evaluate the lived experiences and start to understand, like, how these ideas and these methods of investigation must and do live together and may not always agree, but that is our job as scientists and as citizens and as leaders, to be weighing information from these different sources and to find a path forward. I think number two, we find that climate change discourse, while very compelling and urgent, is not always the best tool for educating kids, especially K through 4th grade or K through 5th grade. We don't believe that discourse is meant to be funneled directly into learning experiences, and we really do see ourselves first and foremost as science teachers and, to a certain extent, social studies teachers. We actually have a lot of social studies teachers we work with. So we do want to address issues of climate change, and we want to look at the scientific research that's related to climate change, but we don't want to warp what we're doing with the obvious politicization of that issue. And then finally, how do we do this without stressing our kids out to the point that they don't feel like action matters? And how do we use what we know about developmental learning goals? We've been looking a lot at Stanford University's social ecology labs work on dosages, pathways, and progressions of environmental literacy, thinking about what is environmental literacy 4th grade and below, what is it in the middle years, what is it in the high school years, and how can Ripple Effect be sure to take that research and achieve our mission, but also acknowledge that there's this entire body of research about best practices for teaching kids about the environmental world and their place within it. I will wrap up here. I want to say thank you. If you'd like to follow us, we're on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm also here by email, especially if anyone has answers or ideas or connections that would help us answer these questions, that would help us connect to people who are interested in teaching in the same ways. I would love to hear from them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. Very, very interesting and very impressive work you were doing. I'll first open up to any questions from anybody else.
Yeah, Claire, Jim
This is
Callahan.
Wendy.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Wendy.
Oh, hi. I don't have a question, but I have to say I found your talk so inspirational. I've made oodles of notes, and so I'm the director of the American Meteorological Society's education program. We do weather, ocean, and climate training for educators, and water literally runs through everything we do. We used to have a course in water. We no longer do. The funding for it wasn't sustained, and that was before my time as director. But your work and your presentation of your work further inspired me to infuse some of what you did across a lot of things I'm working on, and I just wanted to thank you for that. I'll probably follow up with you personally.
That would be wonderful, Wendy. Thank you for those kind words. That's incredibly flattering, and I'd love to hear about what you guys are doing and how your work is connecting to some of these ideas as well. I'm sure we have a ton to learn from you.
Well, likewise. So thank you for your presentation today.
Jim, was you that had the comment or question?
Yeah, for me, yes. Claire, thoughts on your thoughts on this? I think much of what you're speaking of is many of us have shared the same. These are profound questions, like how do we engage the students in a way that doesn't overwhelm them, that they feel helpless, right? I think there's a related one of, if we're truly teaching science is something that you have to practice. You have to know how to do it. It's not something you're told a bunch of facts. That's science. That's just encyclopedic knowledge. That's not the experience of science. And the experience with science is that you're actually doing exploration, and you're looking in engineering, you're doing solutions on things. What I want to think of is, when I see in Louisiana and I see in California and many other states, NGSS, the standards always say we need investigations and experimentation. We have the same problem in California. The vast majority of schools on climate change and related environmental issues, there are no investigations and there's no science experiments. We say it, but we don't do it. We don't have any way that the kids actually are doing something hands-on. They're exploring, which gives them actual experience in the science, and think they're taking action. And the best of all are ones where they're actually part of the solutions. Have you found that our students, what we work with is we actually give ways that the students can literally be doing science research and science explorations where they're contributing to moving forward the action. It isn't just a game. It's real things. And for instance, the video I put forward was looking at Houston, how students are able to highlight where the water is in Houston. Houston's very similar to New Orleans. Where is the water? How are they dealing with it? Where the flooding is? There are ways to highlight that with fairly inexpensive cameras that hardly anybody is using. And these are tools where the kids are actually able to solve one of the problems you're saying is, how do we get to see where the water is, rather than over these years we've been just sort of funneling it out and hiding it. And that's something that's pretty exciting to the kids. They can look at their community and say, that's where the water is. And with these images, you see it brightly shine if you go into shortwave infrared. Is there that thing of, if we don't engage the kids with something that they're actually doing, it's very hard to get past that they feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the act of creation and the act of investigation, it's actually like it's like a vaccine against helplessness to a certain extent. So the class that I observed today, for example, we're working with the Louisiana Department of Education to help them produce a Louisiana anchoring phenomenon website about Louisiana environmental issues. And for anyone who's unaware, like anchoring phenomenon is like, here's a tricky problem with a scientific underpinning or several scientific phenomena embedded in it. It's a real world thing that cannot be easily Googled, cannot be easily answered, and more importantly, it invites student curiosity and student questioning. So the big bet, the sort of scary thing we did with teachers over the summer, scary in a good way, was we said, well, let's actually look at some things that are current. And teachers at first are looking for some sort of smoking gun on climate related water issues. It's like, oh, all these brown trout are dying in this one place in Lake Pontchartrain. That's obviously because the spillway was open. Like you can just tell it's probably that. But the research has not, it's going to take years to really come out. All that we know is that studies are happening, or there's some preliminary results, or there are some articles explaining some scientific hypotheses and theories that are out there. And you have one scientist studying oxygen levels, another scientist studying like algal blooms, but there's not something that's like, we tested all these fish and this theory is proven true. And so there was a lot of uncertainty on the part of teachers. How do you bring these things into a classroom when there's not some like moment of aha and proof and scientific research that's completely backing it up? I hope I'm answering your question, Jim. But the kids said, we loved learning this because it is so current. Like the data that Mrs. Sanchez was bringing into her classroom was from 2019 and 2018, studying this sudden spike in the number of dolphin deaths in the Gulf of Mexico. This is not related to climate change, but she wasn't really sure where this unit would land because there is no for sure answer yet. There's just there are a lot of clues and there's a lot of evidence pointing to something. And she lets students kind of deal with that same evidence, not just simply by reading articles and looking at other people's data, but by looking at data sets and creating their own graphs, and also doing experiments with dissolved oxygen, like understanding how this scientific data even comes to be by engaging in the same processes that the scientists who are studying the dolphin problem are using. So when you say, is there a climate experiments out there? In a way, we don't look for the climate experiment. We look at the issue that is sort of part of this larger international problem. And when we dive in deep enough and connect it to the standards, and look at the actual place and the land and the community, the biotic or abiotic systems that are involved, very naturally the investigations and the experiments and the hands-on pieces reveal themselves, whether it's looking at how sediment is carried by moving water, or looking at dissolved oxygen testing protocols. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, well, yes, and I think one thing I see from the slides is something that I think is very positive and would say from our experience works very well. Is, I mean, clearly when you have you have the stream tables, I don't know if you call them that, but I saw that as hands-on. The level of the charts and the looking at what things look like sideways. I'm saying the wrong term, but what I'm getting at is that to do investigations, do something that's hands-on, do something that involves the students, usually takes specialists. You need people like yourself who know the subject, who know the equipment, who have some experience with it. When we typically rely on, we're going to write something down, hand it over to a K-12 teacher who's got 10,000 other things they got to do the school year, and say, you go do all this. It generally does not get anywhere, especially when, they can do the lecture, they can do the PowerPoint, they can do a video, but to put something hands-on, you need help. And when they get that help, they love it. If someone can come in and do an experiment or take them on a field trip, the teachers don't feel offended like you're displacing them. You're aiding them, and you're making this exciting class. I see that in your programming. Is that right? That you have, like yourself, you're a specialist in this subject.
No, no.
Goes, okay.
Sorry, we train the teachers in workshops. It's actually critical that the teachers lead and facilitate these learning processes. If they need to bring in a guest speaker to talk about how this really happens in the field or to share their research, then yes, we would connect a teacher to a guest speaker. But I mean, in a way, if we're looking for student equity in science education and we want these kinds of experiences available to many more students, then we need to strive for teacher equity. They have to be engaged in anchoring phenomena-based learning themselves. They have to have the space and time to master these techniques, understand how they're useful in the classroom, and also to give feedback on how these protocols should really work in a classroom. So
Claire, can I interrupt a second? I'd like to speak just exactly to this. This is Tamara Ledley again. I've done a lot of work in thinking about how to enable teacher professional learning communities, and it sounds like your program may be a perfect fit for this. To what extent do the teachers communicate with each other about how they're going to use this material in their classes, or do they really come to the workshop and then go off and do it themselves?
Good question. So they come together a few times. For this initial workshop, it's very hands-on, and there's a lot of time built in for them to internalize and adjust things for their own classes and to talk through the changes they want to make and how they're going to roll this out and how they're going to group kids and why and what kinds of like work products they expect to see from their children or their students. And then at least when we do a longer fellowship, they come together at least 3 or 4 more times. And you're absolutely right. Professional learning community is probably the best way to put it. Teachers present how it went for them. The Making Learning Visible is absolutely about teachers presenting their successes and challenges. We analyze student work together. We share video from one another's classes. Honestly, seeing another teacher is, for me, one of the most powerful and potent tools for a teacher because it makes things seem feasible and it helps you imagine yourself in the driver's seat as well. So
I've envisioned this program as an ongoing professional learning community that when it needs expertise from the outside, such as that you've brought in from the various parts of New Orleans that have expertise in the different aspects of it, both the science and in the social areas, to enable that to be ongoing. And I would love to talk to you offline about just providing you with some of these ideas to see if there's any fit for how you might enable your teachers to become even more empowered to implement these materials. And just as Wendy said, I mean, I've talked to Wendy a lot about this program, and I think I'm going to be talking to her tomorrow more about it. But I really would like the opportunity to chat with you offline about this and how it might enhance your program.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. Yes.
Any other questions?
Yes, this is Katie. I am curious about the actual like curriculum that you guys are developing. So it does sound like I was looking on your website and it looks like there's at least one sort of like lesson plan on there. Is that something that you are interested in, like the CLEAN collection? Do you know about that side of CLEAN as well as our network that we do here?
Yes, I am. I actually am very new to CLEAN, and I don't think that I know all the parts and pieces. I'm not familiar with that. I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, I just think that your curriculum could be really great in our collection. So I'd love to connect with you and talk more about maybe trying to work with you to see if we can add that into our, so the way that the collection works is we don't develop resources, but we find good resources for teaching about climate, and then we put it through a review process. So we just have scientists and educators take a look and make sure it's quality. And that's sort of the main thing that we do, is create this database that's good resources for teaching about these. So that's the review process that does that. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you more. Let's maybe connect offline and see if we can work, because if you are developing great, water curriculum, like that would be lovely for us to work together to try to get that in the collection. And then just so you know, our group at Ceres, so not CLEAN, but the larger organization that I work for that helps manage CLEAN, we just got some funding to do some programming on water education in the Four Corners region that we're going to be developing over the next year and stuff. So anyways, yeah, it'd just be great to sort of connect with you. This sounds really wonderful. Yeah. I'm so glad you guys are doing this and awesome work. Let's maybe connect offline.
That would be great. I agree.
Okay, well, it sounds, Claire, like you have a lot of offline conversations that are to come. Are there any other comments or questions?
Hey, Claire, this is Patrick Chandler at the University of Colorado. So I threw a link in the chat there. It's a paper from a colleague here at CU on their work developing curriculum. They focus a lot on a story-based design in which those designing workshops can present teachers with ways to develop a story for their students, which their students can then co-develop with them. It might be an interesting way to think about what you're doing, because I think it shares many elements. But I also wanted to mention a lot of my work has to do with science-art integration, and we are working now on working through and acknowledging climate grief through performative and embodied methods, specifically with 4th and 5th graders. And I found it really a solid tool, not just for sitting within that space with students, but also for enabling students to find ways to add that element of communication to the method, to the outreach that accompanies what they're providing product-wise. For you, maybe the water designs. Anyway, maybe another one to add to an offline conversation. But question-wise, I was wondering how you've worked through that climate grief element so far, and what you may have found that's specifically useful there.
Oh, good question. I think when we've seen more success when we've used stories and thought about them almost as without changing the basic content of the stories, thinking about how can you tell the story in a way that allows a future ripple effect student to connect emotionally to a central protagonist, almost as if you were going to like when we did the Ile de Jean Charles unit, we told it as through the eyes of a girl named Amaya, who is a real person on the island, no longer there, but and we fleshed out, or we used biographical details of this person to kind of like help students focus on there's this central person, and she can't take the bus to and from home and school anymore because the road connecting Ile de Jean Charles to the mainland where her school is being eroded by these waves. And so that is sort of like the first grade version of the Ile de Jean Charles relocation unit. And a 5th grade version was quite different. And it's more thinking about this entire island and the entire community. Students would return again and again. They loved the unit. They'd always ask, like, what's going on with Amaya? How can we help her? Like, I think there's something about building a personal connection with a student in another place that it brings up questions of like, how could classrooms in different climate vulnerable locations actually connect and learn about the experiences of one another's communities? I think I'm not answering your question fully because I don't feel like we've arrived at something very satisfactory, except to say that by building up that personal connection, kids are able to focus on the experience of a person or a family or a community, and it makes them feel the empathy sort of takes the place of like catastrophic thinking. We're not dealing at something at a huge scale. We might connect to something at a huge scale. We might connect to other communities facing similar harms. But they can kind of zero in on Amaya and think about what they would want as a 7-year-old, or what they would want what they'd want for their family, and what choices might be available to them. I will also say the units naturally invited parents in. The issues are so intense, and the prospect of developing a grieving atmosphere was so real to us. We were so worried about that. We decided to bring parents in to kind of like support the teacher in hosting these kinds of conversations with the students. And one of the most touching and amazing moments was that in the first grade classroom that I'm thinking of, Miss Bell, one of her students was from Honduras. He had learned English, and he had come to the States the year before. He had learned English in that time. His mother came in and described how a massive flood wiped out their family home in Honduras in the early 90s. And as she's telling this story, and there are lots of other moms there, she starts to cry. Also, her first grader is translating for her, like just telling the story. And all the other moms and dads just put their hands on her, and in front of this entire first grade class, like consoled her in that moment. And so I think there's something about a community's ability in social ties to be resilient and to find a source of strength in one another that I don't know how you replicate that across the system, but I do know Ripple Effect would like to find a way to make that a central component of the learning process.
Wow.
Great.
Well, we're past our time now. That's a very powerful note to stop on. I know Katie might have had one other question. I'm not even sure
Nope,
if she.
I snuck it. I got it in there. Thank you.
All right. Well then, with that, Claire, we have lots of follow-up conversations for you. Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting and powerful presentation. We really, truly appreciate it. So thanks a lot, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you guys. It's been a great honor, and I can't wait to connect with all of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.